The Villisca axe murders. The victims. The victims were parents Josiah, aged 43, and Sarah, aged 39, along with their 4 children, Herman Montgomery, 11, Mary Catherine, 10, Arthur Boyd, 7, and Paul Vernon, 5. The Moores were a wealthy and well-known family in their community, admired and respected by many. On June 9, 1912, Mary Catherine Moore invited her friends, Ina May, 8, and Lena Gertrude Stillinger, 11, to spend the night at the Moore residence. That evening, the visiting girls and the Moore family attended the Presbyterian Church, where Sarah coordinated the Children's Day program. The event ended around 9:30 p.m., after which the Moores and the Stillinger sisters walked home, arriving between 9:45 and 10 p.m. They had no idea of the horror that would unfold that night. The discovery of the crime. The next morning, June 10th, at around 7 a.m. Mary Peckham, the Moore's neighbor, noticed that the family had not come outside to do their usual morning chores. Concerned, she knocked on the Moore's door. When no one answered and she found the door locked, she let out the family's chickens and called Josiah's brother, Ross Moore. Like Peckham, Ross knocked and called out but received no response. Using his copy of the house key, Ross unlocked the front door. While Peckham waited on the porch, Ross entered the parlor and opened the guest room door, only to discover the bodies of Ina and Lena Stillinger lying lifeless in the bed. Ross immediately told Peckham to call Villisca's marshal, Henry Hank Horton. When Horton arrived and searched the house, he made a chilling discovery. The entire Moore family and the 2 Stillinger girls had been brutally murdered with a blunt object. The murder weapon, Josiah's own axe, was found in the guest room where the Stillinger sisters were. Doctors concluded that the murders occurred sometime between midnight and 5 a.m. 2 used cigarettes found in the attic suggested that the killer or killers had waited there patiently until the Moore family and their overnight guests, the Stillinger sisters, had fallen asleep. However, according to official reports, no cigarettes were ever documented, which raised even deeper questions about the investigation. The killer, or killers, began their gruesome work in the main bedroom, where Josiah and Sarah Moore were sleeping. Josiah received far more blows from the axe than any other victim. His face had been struck so many times that his eyes were completely destroyed. There was even a gouge mark on the ceiling, likely made as the murderer raised the axe high above his head to deliver the fatal strikes. The situation grew even more mysterious. Did the killers have a personal vendetta against the Moore family? While Sarah was struck with the sharp edge of the axe, the other victims were bludgeoned with the blunt side. Herman, Mary Catherine, Arthur, and Paul were all attacked in the same way, receiving fatal blows to the head while they slept. The killer then returned to the master bedroom to strike Josiah and Sarah again, knocking over a blood-soaked shoe in the process before moving downstairs to the guest room to kill Ina and Lena Stillinger. It appeared that afterwards someone took a 4-pound slab of bacon from the icebox and placed it next to the axe. Investigators also found untouched food in a basin filled with bloody water on the kitchen table, indicating the killer may have washed up before leaving. Detectives believe that all of the victims, except Lena Stillinger, were asleep when they were killed. Lena was found lying crosswise on the bed with a defensive wound on her arm, suggesting she had awakened and tried to fight back. Her body was discovered lying on her back, her hips raised, and her undergarments removed. One leg was positioned in a way that exposed her genital area, leading authorities to speculate that the killer or killers had sexually assaulted her, or attempted to. Later investigations raised the chilling question: was there any real evidence of this? Another bizarre detail added to the horror. Every mirror in the house had been covered with cloths, clothing, or blankets. Had the killer, or killers, been suffering from dysmorphophobia, a psychological fear, or disgust with one's reflection? They had even gone so far as to remove garments from wardrobes just to drape them over the mirrors. After the initial search of the house, crime scene investigators were called in to examine the site. Around 8:40 a.m., the town's central telephone office sent out a public alert, notifying every household in Villisca about the murders. Within minutes, townspeople rushed to the Moore residence, flooding the crime scene. This completely contaminated the evidence, as dozens of people trampled through the house. Some even took pieces of Josiah's skull as souvenirs, and the murder weapon, the axe, was handled by hundreds of curious onlookers who had come to see the gruesome scene. The sheriff struggled for hours to regain control of the situation. Some speculated that perhaps the killer or killers had been hired by someone from the town, possibly driven by jealousy or resentment toward the Moore family. The mystery only deepened. County Coroner Dr. Lindquist arrived at the scene around 9 a.m. After personally inspecting the crime scene, he met with Henry Hank Horton, the town's night watchman who first discovered the murders, and Sheriff Orrin Jackson, to review the evidence they had gathered. Dr. Lindquist grew increasingly frustrated with the townspeople's constant interference in the investigation and urged the sheriff to summon the National Guard to secure the premises. By 10:30 a.m., National Guard troops had arrived and established a secure perimeter, finally keeping the crowds at bay. A local pharmacist, who was also an amateur photographer, arrived at the scene to take photographs. However, he was dismissed and told that taking pictures would be too gruesome. There may have been an economic motive behind this decision. At the time, many pharmacies profited by selling postcards of crime scenes. Although Coroner Lindquist assembled the coroner's jury later that afternoon, it took several more hours before they were finally allowed to enter the Moore home and view the bodies. After 10 p.m., District Attorney Ratcliffe was contacted and finally gave permission for the undertaker to remove the victims' bodies. The fire station had been converted into a temporary morgue, and all of the bodies were transported there close to 2 a.m., roughly 24 hours after the murders had occurred. The investigation doctors estimated that the murders took place between midnight and 2 a.m. Autopsies revealed that all of the victims died from severe head trauma. Some wondered how a killer could move about a creaky, compact farmhouse without waking anyone. Newspapers of the time speculated that the murderer might have drugged the family's milk or cocoa with a sedative. Though toxicology testing was not a standard part of autopsies at that time, investigators discovered a possible vantage point in the barn, near a knothole, suggesting the killer may have watched the Moore family for some time before the attack. The two used cigarettes. Found in the attic further supported the theory that the killer had entered through a window or unlocked the back door, hiding there until the family returned from church and went to bed. Two particularly interesting pieces of evidence were uncovered. Upstairs, a kerosene lamp had its chimney removed and its wick turned down low, providing only a faint light. Downstairs, investigators found a piece of a keychain that did not belong to anyone in the Moore household. With these limited clues in hand, the time had come to begin interrogating potential suspects. Following this brief investigation, the coroner convened an inquest on June 11, 1912, during which 13 witnesses gave testimony. But one question remained hauntingly unanswered. Was the killer among them? Would the hidden truth finally come to light? Suspects. Over time, several possible suspects emerged, including Reverend George Kelly, Frank F. Jones, William Mansfield, Loving Mitchell, Paul Mueller, and Henry Lee Moore, no relation to the victims. Among them, one man was tried twice for the murders. The first trial ended in a hung jury, and the second resulted in an acquittal. The other suspects were eventually cleared, but each was interrogated in turn as part of the long and confusing investigation. Andrew Sawyer. During the investigation, any unidentified stranger in or around Villisca became a potential suspect, and Andrew Sawyer was one of them. He was questioned but never charged. Sawyer was reportedly obsessed with the murders and slept fully dressed, as if ready to flee at any moment. Disturbingly, he also slept with an axe beside his bed. Frank F. Jones. Frank Fernando Jones was a Villisca resident and an Iowa state senator. Before opening his own store, Josiah Moore had worked for many years at Jones's hardware and farm equipment business. It was said that Moore had taken a number of Jones's clients, including the lucrative John Deere dealership, after leaving the business. Rumors circulated that Moore was having an affair with Jones's daughter-in-law, though there was no evidence to support this claim. William Mansfield. Another theory suggested that Senator Jones had hired William "Insane Blackie" Mansfield, a former convict and ex-U.S. Army soldier stationed at Fort Leavenworth, to kill the Moore family. About 9 months before the Villisca murders, a similar axe murder case occurred in Colorado Springs, Colorado. This was followed by 2 more axe murders in Ellsworth, Kansas, and Paola, Kansas. The The cases bore striking similarities, leading investigators to believe they might have been committed by the same person. Other murders possibly linked to this chain of crimes included a series of unsolved axe killings along the Southern Pacific Railroad between 1911 and 1912, the unsolved New Orleans Axeman murders, and other similar homicides from the same era. The Colorado Springs murders were particularly similar to the Moore killings in their method of execution. H.C. Wayne, his wife and child, and Mrs. A.J. Burnham were all found murdered with an axe or hatchet. The windows had been covered with sheets to prevent anyone outside from looking in, just as in Villisca, where the killer used aprons and skirts to cover the windows. As in the Moore case, the murderer wiped the blood from the axe and covered the victims' heads with bedclothes. Mansfield became the prime suspect of the Burns Detective Agency in Kansas City and Detective James Newton Wilkerson, who believed Mansfield was a cocaine-addicted serial killer. According to Wilkerson, Mansfield was responsible for the axe murders of his wife, child, father-in-law, and mother-in-law in Blue Island, Illinois, on July 5, 1914, 2 years after the Villisca murders. Wilkerson also linked Mansfield to the axe murders committed 4 days before Villisca in Paola, Kansas, and to the murders of Jenny Peterson and Jenny Miller in Aurora, Illinois. According to Detective Wilkerson's investigation, all the murders were carried out in exactly the same way, strongly suggesting that the same man was responsible. Wilkerson stated that Mansfield could be placed at the scene of each crime on the night of the killings. In every case, the victims were murdered with an axe, and the mirrors in the house were covered. A burning lamp with its chimney removed was left at the foot of the bed, and a basin in the kitchen indicated that the killer had washed himself before leaving. In both instances, the murderer wore gloves to avoid leaving fingerprints. Wilkerson believed this was strong evidence that the killer was William Mansfield, whose fingerprints were on file at the federal military prison in Leavenworth. In 1916, Wilkerson successfully convinced a grand jury to open a formal investigation, and Mansfield was arrested and brought from Kansas City to Montgomery County. However, payroll records provided Mansfield with an alibi, showing he had been working in Illinois at the time of the Villisca murders. He was released due to lack of evidence and later won a lawsuit against Wilkerson, receiving $2,225 in damages. Wilkerson, however, maintained that Senator Jones's political influence not only led to Mansfield's release but also resulted in the arrest and trial of Reverend George Kelly. Instead, despite Mansfield's supposed alibi, a restaurant owner from Shenandoah, Iowa, named R.H. Thorpe, claimed he saw Mansfield boarding a train in Clarinda on the morning after the Villisca murders. The man told Thorpe he had walked all the way from Villisca. If proven true, this testimony would invalidate Mansfield's alibi. Additionally, Mrs. Vena Tompkins of Marshalltown reported hearing 3 men in the woods plotting the murder of the Moore family shortly before the crimes took place. Henry Lee. Moore. Henry Lee. Moore was a suspected serial killer who, just months after the Villisca murders, was convicted of murdering his mother and grandmother. Despite sharing the same last name, he was not related to the Villisca Moores. His weapon of choice was also an axe. Before and after the Villisca murders, a series of similar axe murders occurred, all bearing striking similarities to the Moore case. This led investigators to suspect that some or perhaps all of the crimes could have been committed by a single axe-wielding serial killer. Like Blackie Mansfield, Henry Lee Moore became a prime suspect in several of these unsolved cases. Samuel R. Moyer. During the investigation, it was reported that Samuel Ronald Moyer, Josiah Moore's brother-in-law, had repeatedly threatened to kill Josiah. However, after further inquiry, Moyer's alibi cleared him of any involvement in the murders. Paul Muller. In their 2017 book, The Man from the Train, Bill James and his daughter Rachel McCarthy James proposed that the Villisca axe murders were part of a much larger series of killings, all committed by a single serial killer. They concluded that the murderer was most likely Paul Muller, or Miller. A German immigrant, Muller had been the sole suspect in the 1897 murders of a family in West Brookfield, Massachusetts, who had employed him as a farmhand. Despite a year-long manhunt, he was never captured, leading the authors to believe he continued killing across the United States, including in Villisca. Reverend George Kelly. Kelly was an English-born traveling preacher who happened to be in town on the night of the murders. During his adolescence, he was described as eccentric due to a mental illness. As an adult, he was accused of peeping on young women and girls and repeatedly demanding they pose naked. On June 8, 1912, Kelly came to Villisca to teach at the Children's Day services that the Moore family would attend on June 9, 1912. Hours before the bodies were discovered, between 5 a.m. and 5:50 a.m. on June 10, 1912, he left town. Reverend Kelly later confessed to the murders in court, but the jury did not believe his confession. In the following weeks, Kelly showed great interest in the case and wrote numerous letters to the police, investigators, and the family of the deceased. This behavior raised suspicion, prompting a private detective to write to Kelly, asking him for details that only someone with knowledge of the murders could know. Kelly responded in great detail, claiming that he had heard voices and had likely witnessed the murders. His known mental illness led authorities to question whether he actually knew the details, because he committed the crimes, or if he had fabricated the story. 2 years after the murders, in 1914, Kelly was arrested for sending obscene materials through the mail. He had sexually harassed a woman who had applied to work as his secretary. He was sent to St. Elizabeth's Hospital, the National Mental Hospital in Washington, D.C. This reignited speculation among investigators that Kelly could have been the killer of the Moore family. In 1917, Kelly was formally arrested for the Villisca murders. Police obtained a confession, but it came after hours of questioning, and Kelly later retracted his statement. After 2 separate trials, he was acquitted. Even today, it is said that at midnight in the Villisca house, one can hear a sound from the attic, a breath, like a child whispering everyone has forgotten who the killer was, but the house still remembers. And whenever the wind blows, the axe echoes once more. Years have passed, the town has gone quiet, but the darkness beneath the mirrors has never disappeared. Josiah's missing eyes still seem to be searching, perhaps for his killer, or perhaps they're still inside, searching for themselves. Current use of the house. Today, the house is a tourist destination in the small rural town of Villisca, Iowa. In 1995, a couple purchased the house and removed all modern renovations, restoring it to its 1912 condition. The couple now offers tours and overnight stays. The house's main attraction is its reputation as a haunted site, due to the tragic events that occurred within its walls. If you watched the video this far, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. I love you very much. I will continue to make videos as long as you are around.